Hello and welcome to this development video for the Space Combat Kit for Unity. We'll be showing you a couple of things that are in development, just to sort of let you know what's going on and get some feedback if you have any comments, just to sort of check on you guys if you think things are going the right direction. So basically what I've got here, there's two things I want to show you in this video. The first one is a much more comprehensive system for setting up visual effects for the engines, for the exhaust, and also the ability to set the states of an engine. So instead of just having sort of all these parameters of like boost and cruise and all this sort of all the different sort of parameters just added to the component. The idea is to have the engine be able to be in different states and only in one state at a time. So basically, you would be able to say, okay, when the engine is in the cruise state, there's this amount of steering and this amount of thrust. When it's in the boost, it's got a different steering and movement thrust. And in, let's say, warp, you've got completely different parameters as well. And the idea is you can create any kind of state for the engine that you want, such as some kind of, subspace drive, warp drive, or sort of, anything in between. So the way this works is if I go to the thruster, I've set up two thrusters here on the ship, and if you go to the inspector, I've just named it Engines 3D Visual Effects Controller 2 is sort of the development name. And basically what you've got here is you've got a few settings. So the axis, basically when you create a thruster, something that has an exhaust, a visual exhaust, you'll set the axis that it refers to. Now, for example, if the thruster is for movement, and you set it to the axis to Z, that's the forwards. So that will be typically what you'd use for, typical engine thrusters. But you can set it for any kind of, you could have side thrusters, vertical thrusters, and then you set the axis to all these different values here. Now, also you can set it to procedural, and what happens with procedural is that it takes the input that's going to the engine, in terms of the thrust, and it's calculating whether the thruster should be firing. If that thruster would be, part of this force that you're already sending to the engine. So you can click procedural, and then you can just position your thruster anywhere on the ship, and it will calculate whether whether it makes sense for it to be firing. Um, and under here, you've also got, I'll probably rename this to something a little bit clearer, but basically you can set it to movement or steering. So if it's a movement thruster, it's something that fires when you're moving in a certain direction, and for steering, it's something that fires to rotate the ship. So for steering, also you can set it to steering, and you've got procedural as well. And then also you can put the thruster anywhere on the vehicle, and it will decide if the rotation of the ship, the torque, the kind of turning force that you're applying to the ship, is something that it makes sense for that thruster to be firing when that force is being applied. So we'll go down a little bit further. Now here you've got a lot more settings for setting up the different visual effects. So you can set up engine states. So this is the one of the core changes to the engines, the spaceship engines, is the ability to put in different states. So, for example, you're going to have a cruise, which is normal, boost, and warp. Those are the three examples we're going to be looking at today, but you can obviously, set up any ones you want. So if we go here, we've got the cruise state. And then you can set up animated renders, animated particle system values, and animated shader values. And when it says animated, basically what it means is that you can, um, based on the throttle amount from 0 to 1, you can change these values. So that's what it means by animation. When the throttle goes from 0 to 1, you can set how what kind of visual effects are created and how they change. So let's take a look at that. So we've got animated renderers, and here for this thruster, basically in this example, we've got particles. So you can see that coming out the back, and we've also got a glow, which is just this sort of grill shape, glowing grill shape, and that makes up the engine in this example. So we've got those two, and both of them are renderers, right? One's a particle renderer, one's a mesh renderer. So if we go to the settings here, we can set the particle renderer here. Then you can set the color key. This is the color of the material that the particle has. And then you can set the color curve. This is a gradient. It's, part of Unity. You'll typically see it on the particle system settings and stuff like that. Anyway, you can set the color. This is the color at 0, and this is the color at 1 throttle. So from 0 to full throttle, you're saying this is how the color should change. So typically you might have a very low alpha here, or 0. So it fades out completely at 0, and some amount of alpha at the end there. So that's what we're doing for both the particles and the glow, the sort of glowing grill we've got here. And you say, and we're basically saying, as we go from 0 to 1 throttle, we want the color to change according to this gradient. So that's what animated renderers are. Now, you also might want to change some particle system values. So in this setting here, you can add a particle system, and you can change different float values from one value, from a min value, which is when the throttle is at 0, to the max value when the throttle is at 1. And the value could be start speed, start size, velocity scale, and length scale. So just to sort of make that clear, start speed is here, start size is here. If you go down to the render, you've got speed scale and length scale, and these two values. In this case, we're doing speed scale. They basically stretch. When you have this stretch billboard setting, it stretches out these streaks, which look cool for space engines. Okay, so you can animate those values from the min value to max value as the throttle goes from 0 to 1, and you can also set the curve. So if, for example, you might want it to stay at the min value until you get to a certain point, and then you go up towards the max value. You can set with these animation curves, how you want things to work. And finally, if you've got your own custom shaders, which we don't have here, but you might have it, you can add a renderer, you can add a shader key, and you can animate, for a float value on the shader, and you can animate it from a min to max value as you go from 0 throttle to 1, 0 to full throttle. Okay, so those are the three basic visual effects settings that you're going to be able to set for the engine. Now you can create um, settings for cruise, boost, or well, you can create it for any engine state. So in this example, we've got cruise, boost, and warp. Um, we've got different values for each, and let's have a look at what that looks like in practice. So if we run the scene, okay, so this is the cruise state with the throttle set at 0, and you can just see it's got a faint glow there. This is how we've set it up, and when we press W, this is what the engine looks like in full throttle cruise mode. Okay, so this is just normal chugging along at full speed. Um, Okay, so you can see how all the visual effects change according to how we've set it up. Now, if I switch to boost, this is what we've set up for boost. We've stretched out the particles with that velocity scale parameter. Um, we've sort of animated that, and also changed all the color values as well. And if I go to warp, this is what the warp looks like. So you can see that you can change basically any kind of visual effect very easily for different engine states, and you can have a completely different appearance of things based on what state the engine is in, which is something that would have been very hard to achieve before. Also, with the fact that there weren't any engine states, so it would have been tricky before to sort of set up a lot of different things like cruise, boost, maybe a subspace drive, a warp drive. That would have been complicated to set up in the old system. Okay, so just to show the steering thruster, or steering thruster, we've got also this thruster here that was disabled, but I'll just enable it now. Basically, what it is just got a cylinder here to make it look good, and it shoots a jet out the side. You can see it's pointed along the z-axis, and this is important with the procedural setup here. The procedural axis where the thruster is pointing will obviously be the determining factor in whether it fires correctly. So basically we've got it pointing out the side. So you can see that this thruster should fire when the nose is turning to the left. So if it's shooting out the right, then that means it should turn the ship to the left. So when we turn the ship to the left, we should see that thruster fire. And it's set to procedural and set to the engine parameter is steering. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so if we rotate the ship, you can see that the thruster is firing to turn the ship to the left, and if we go to the right, it doesn't fire. Okay, but it fires out when we rotate to the left, which is the way it should be. Now, if all we do is grab this thruster and drag it out the back, now it doesn't fire when we're turning to the left. Now it fires when we turn to the right. And this is because it calculates procedurally whether the thruster should be firing for a particular rotational force. Okay, so just finally, this is very much a work in progress, but the vehicle engines 3D is changed to rigid body engines 3D just because it's more clear. And you can see that in here, instead of having the steering and movement parameters, you're going to be able to set for each engine state the steering forces and the movement forces. Now, this is something very much a work in progress, but just to give you an idea of how things are going to be set up. So you can create different states that have different steering forces and different movement forces, and on the thruster you can set up for each of the states, you know um, what kind of visual effects you've got. And although this it kind of looks complicated and it looks like a lot of settings that you might have to do for a lot of different ships, the good thing is you can basically create a prefab out of this thruster now, and all you have to do is add the engines here. So all of the since we've got the particles and the glow effects under the object, the only setting that we need to set is the engines. So we could make a prefab out of this and just drag it onto any number of ships, just set the engines, and they're good to go. Or you could just modify a couple of small details on each ship. So that's pretty much it for this development video. Let me know what you think of this. You know, if you think it looks good, if you think it looks, I don't know, too complicated. If you've got any sort of feedback or comments, I'd be glad to hear it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.